Hello again, I'm Braddock Supervisor John Cook. Welcome back to Braddock Neighborhood News, the program I am using to provide you with information on issues facing our community and ideas on how we can strengthen our neighborhoods. This month, I'm pleased to welcome Barbara Berlin, the Director of Zoning Evaluation for the Fairfax County Department of Planning and Zoning, and Nell Hurley, the Braddock District Planning Commissioner on the Fairfax County Planning Commission. As Fairfax County continues to grow, it is the responsibility of people like Ms. Berlin and Commissioner Hurley to ensure that development meets the criteria established in the county zoning ordinances. Barbara, Nell, thanks for coming on the show.
And thank you, Supervisor Cook.
You know, let's give a little background to our viewers who may not be experts in land use, law, and rules. Most of us aren't, but you know, whenever we do development, whether it's putting in some houses or putting in a big office complex or something else, there are some rules and regulations that are in place for good reasons, and it starts with something called the comprehensive plan. Barbara, can you just tell us about the plan?
That's absolutely correct. Comprehensive plan really forms the foundation for how the county wishes to grow and develop and redevelop. So in Fairfax County, we have a policies plan, and then we have area plans that cover the various districts of the county, sub-districts, more or less following the magisterial districts, although those boundaries change every 10 years, so it's not quite the same, but they're very specific to the various parts of the county. In order to implement the comprehensive plan, we have a zoning ordinance, and that is the regulatory piece by which we evaluate development applications, anything from a church or a school, an expansion, daycare center, to something like a shopping center or high-rise office building. And within the zoning ordinance are the rules by which we look at how large the building can be. Are there restrictions on the heights, how far away from the road it has to be, those kinds of things that really form the development envelope.
And the plan not only is a book sort of descriptions, but it's actually a map of the county.
That's
and you
correct.
can see where there are commercial areas, residential areas, industrial areas. There are areas that are residential for townhouses, areas for large lots, small lots. And so that's sort of what the plan is, kind of a broad idea.
Generally, that is true. And in Fairfax County, being as large as it is and as developed as it is, the comprehensive plan map, to a large extent, represents what's already in place and the base, what we call the base level of what the plan allows. Our comprehensive plan allows for a base level of development, which is pretty straightforward, and then what someone may become entitled to with adding addressing some policy needs of the county.
And so when we get into zoning, maybe somebody says, I want to buy 10 acres of land and put townhouses there, so I'm going to put 50 townhouses, and I'm going to put a little park here, and oh, there's a stream we've got to look at, and somebody says, well, gee, you're going to have to add a turn lane on the road, and all of that goes as part of the zoning package, so to speak.
That's right, and our process is very collaborative with other departments and other agencies of the county. Zoning evaluation is a part of the Department of Planning and Zoning, and the applications for the zoning for the projects would come to us. We evaluate them for completeness, for thoroughness, and then distribute them to other agencies of the county, such as Department of Transportation, Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, Virginia Department of Transportation as well, and all of these agencies, as well as staff internal to the Department of Planning and Zoning, evaluate the plans for thoroughness and how they address the comprehensive plan.
And part of that collaborative process involves something called the Planning Commission, which is a group of citizens appointed by the Board of Supervisors, one per district, a couple at large. Nell, you're the Braddock District member on that commission, and you advise the Board of Supervisors sort of from a citizen perspective.
Correct. We're charged with advising you, making recommendations for planned and balanced and equitable growth. The county is growing. The county is going to continue to grow. This is a good thing. Our property values are up. We have a high quality of life. We want to keep it that way. We want to protect what people already have and still allow growth. And transportation, as will come up with many of your monthly interviews, transportation is a huge concern. You mentioned the 10 acres. Well, if it's zoned R2, that means you can put 2 houses per acre by right, is what it's called. You could put 20 houses there. But you can't just drive those houses, have 20 driveways going onto Braddock Road. Way too many traffic problems. So how are you going to arrange for parking for all of those people? How many driveways do they have? How big a garages do they have? They'll have to come in with all sorts of plans before it can get through. Even by right, they still have to follow all of these other rules, environmental rules. You mentioned the stream. How are you going to take care of stormwater management? There's all sorts of details, conflicting rules that hopefully will all be worked out by the staff and given a thorough review by the Planning Commission before we present you, the Board of Supervisors, with a complete package.
You know, and Nell, you mentioned sort of, you know, an equitable way of looking at things, and you know, it's a good, that's a good topic, because it's not like you look at one application all by itself. It's part of what's going on in the larger county, or at least that part of the county, that region. So it's not just, gee, do I like this shopping center proposal? It's more of, well, gee, when we have shopping centers, we need A, B, and C. And boy, this one has a problem with D. And so it's really a matter of trying to have same rules apply to everybody, same concepts.
The same concepts, but things will be different in different parts of the county. What would be acceptable in Tyson's area, very tall buildings, we would never allow in the Clifton area, where we're looking for 1 house per 5 acres and trying to protect the Occoquan watershed. So we don't have the same rules in every part of the county. And
that's where the plan comes in, right? Because that's the idea, is different areas are designated for different things. So that right now, one of our broad policies in the county is to try to direct as much of our new development as we can to the Metro Corridor, Reston to Tyson's Corner, down to Springfield along the hot lanes, where we have transit, metro, hot lanes, bus service, so that we can have residential and office together, what's called mixed use, but to keep it in those corridors. And Barbara, that's a lot of what your staff's working on.
Absolutely. You've spoken to it very, very, very well. The county's land use plan has, for a number of years actually, directed the more intense development into the suburban corridors and into our urban center, which is Tyson's Corner, so that we don't have total sprawl without a pattern, and so that we can try to manage our transportation, which is always a challenge, but nonetheless we try.
And then the other part being what we call redevelopment, taking maybe a 50-year-old shopping center that the owner wants to redo, maybe expand it, maybe put some taller buildings, add a few shops, services, stores, maybe put a theater or hotel in, but then sort of saying, okay, well, what's that going to mean? What's it mean to transportation? What's it mean to stormwater? How we handle the rain that comes down on the pavement, and everything else, impact on the community, noise, all the stuff you got to look at.
That's correct. And you spoke earlier about equity in land use, and one of the things we look at as well is, how is the adjacent property affected? Can the parcel next door to the shopping center, can it be developed, so that we don't leave a parcel of land or a landowner with the inability to develop that land? So those are some of the things we look at. But yes, redevelopment is a very hot topic right now, and I think is really the direction that we're going to see more and more of our development as the county has been built out. Some of the challenges of redevelopment are really not just redevelopment, but infill development, and they're not necessarily the same thing. But infill development is what happens to the pieces of land that have kind of been left over after major subdivisions have been built, and what do you do with those? The challenge there is, how do you make it blend in with the surrounding community, when in fact sometimes we're left with really odd-shaped parcels. we're looking at our regulatory process right now. I think that's something that we're looking at very carefully to see, are we getting what we really want to see?
You know, infill it's very important in the Braddock District,
Yes.
because we're starting to see
Absolutely.
a lot of applications coming in where people want to do that. And sort of as you said, it is, you know, it's interesting. You can have acres and acres and acres of land, which over time there have been housing developments put in and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden there's 10 acres that somebody has owned for 100 years or 50 years, 75, and they've had one house on it. And all of a sudden they say, you know, I'm 75 years old and I want to sell this and I want to leave the money to my family. And oh, this developer says, you know, there are townhouses all around it, so I'd like to put, you know, I'm going to sell it to them, and they want to put townhouses on. And then Nell, the Planning Commission, has to say, all right, does that make sense? Because, boy, it's a change in how we deal with that across a whole district, across a whole county. That's why you get the big bucks. That's your job, though. That's on your plate.
Yes, that's a great deal part of my job is the infill development. When that case you just mentioned, I see it over and over and over again. We've got a couple of cases pending now. I'm expecting several more to come in this fall, that it's maybe an acre and a half, and it's got a little bit of access to a road, and but there's a stormwater problem there, and well, if we could buy that land too, and then we work with the developer, well, if you can also work with this guy, maybe you can work it out so you have a big piece of land and you can work one big driveway that will access onto this cul-de-sac, and everything works out well. So we work a lot with the developers, a lot with the staff, sometimes with the Commonwealth attorney, with the various people to try to get everything together. And as I mentioned before, the stormwater management has become a huge issue, and that is always, all right, where does the water run off? And the neighbors, just about every time, the neighbors will say, well, we already have a stormwater problem. What are you going to do about the stormwater?
Right, because for 100 years, that 2 or 3 acres has been trees, and now if it's 3 houses, and somebody says that rain's going to go in my basement, and you got to make sure it does, and it's an inexact science, as we find out. I know I've got developments in Braddock District that when they were built 30 years ago, nobody thought there was a problem until somebody down the road a bit, now they have a wet backyard. And Barbara, we learn that as we learn more and more, we know that 30, 40 years ago we didn't know as much, and so sometimes we have these problems.
Well, and it's an area that I'm certainly not an expert in stormwater management, would never try to pretend to be, but it is one of those areas that as a planner have to be aware of, and of the trends and things that are being done. Even 15 years ago, talking about green roofs, for example, was just a pipe dream, really, and now we're seeing it more and more. Major cities have green roofs on top of municipal buildings, and we are seeing green roofs incorporated into a lot of our new developments. And that's just one way of managing the rainwater and holding it so that it can seep slower and not run off and carry pollutants with it. That is just but one example. Another is we're using pervious pavement, and this is all these wonderful technical terms that we throw around, but pervious pavement is simply, instead of a solid piece of concrete, it might have I want to say a diagonal pattern built into it with drainage holes, so that again the water can seep into the soils and not run off too quickly.
And a lot of this has to do with the Chesapeake Bay. Under the Clean Water Act, there are restrictions on how many pollutants we can dump into the bay. And when water comes down from the sky and hits our roof or our driveway and then runs into the drain, it carries with it all sorts of stuff. It might pick up a little motor oil on your driveway. It might pick up a little dirt here and there. And then it goes into the pipes, and they go rushing into bigger and bigger pipes. And at some point, the pipe opens up to a stream. And sometimes that water comes out at over 50 miles an hour, and it just blows away everything in its path, creating erosion issues, bringing a lot of pollutants that get dumped into the bay. And we've got a problem with needing to clean up Chesapeake Bay and our our role in that. And so that's why we are so concerned with the green roofs and with pervious pavement and all this stuff that we've got to figure out as we're covering over the ground, how do we keep the water where it fell and not pushing it all into a stream. And it's not easy, is it, Nell?
No, sir, and it's in some ways, we don't have as many problems in Braddock District as they do in other parts of the county, especially down right next to the Potomac River, where
Correct.
Alexandria floods frequently. And sometimes it's how do you manage, not just treat the stormwater and retain it, but manage it with the water coming downstream or coming even up with a big hurricane with the floods. So we have to look at the 10-year storms, the 100-year storms, the sort of things that could really be catastrophic. You mentioned the green roofs. I've also learned about green walls that were, as you've been driving along the road, the highway, and you see those big brick walls that are protecting the neighbors from noise, you'll notice more and more ivy and greenery growing on them. And now we're encouraging that if you have a parking ramp surrounded by townhouses and apartments, might have a green roof on top of the parking ramp, and then you'll have green walls where you have ivy growing so that it's more attractive to the neighborhood. So we want it to be not only the stormwater management, but also most of us like green stuff.
Right.
So it's the whole concept of working with nature in the various ways. It's a fascinating part of the job.
Yeah, and it does make things just very complex and complicated. You know, we were talking earlier about the neighbors. We said, boy, you know, somebody wants to put a house in where it's been an empty lot and the neighbors are concerned. And so we have this concept of buffering, of what do you put sort of on the lot lines, especially if you have a residential neighborhood here and maybe a shopping mall here or an office building. You don't want the office building to be right on the line and somebody's, you know, backyard is right there. So we often say we want some trees, we want some bushes, we want some stuff. Keeps the noise level down, keeps it so you can't see. And we've got a lot of rules on that.
Yes, we do. We require certain barriers and a certain amount of greenery between land uses, especially in a large area where the transitions are very distinct, and areas where it's very clear where the office area is, where the residential area is. Those are the kinds of things where we want those barriers and greenery between the land uses. What gets to be a more interesting challenge, I think, is when we look at mixed-use development, where we actually have residential uses, office uses, commercial uses, all part of the same complex. And we don't want to separate them because the idea is to bring them together, but at the same time, you want to create residences that enjoy quiet and peace, and yet have the convenience of neighborhood shopping outside the door. That's what we're really looking at more and more. And so some of our barrier requirements, I think, relate more to an earlier suburban era of development in the county. And as we transition into the redevelopment and infill development, we have to look at those. You'll see often when an application comes before you, both the Planning Commission and the board, there'll be a long list of waivers requested from some of the requirements of the Public Facilities Manual or the zoning ordinance. And that is the kind of thing that we are seeing more and more often.
And we have to look at costs, because those things have to be balanced out. And there are a lot of details in these applications. For example, we've talked about Chesapeake Bay, and so we'll have applications come in front of us where we're talking about how much, what kind of faucets do you have to have in the restroom of a building. You say, well, why are you getting into that? Well, part of it's because you have to look at how much water is the building producing and where is it going and being put into the system. We've got everything from energy and transportation. You say, okay, if this is an office building, how many people are coming? How are they getting there? Are they walking? Are they driving? Are they taking a bus or metro if they're close to metro? Or and if there's too many cars, what's that going to do to the roads? And so then we have what's called proffers, and that's where we ask the owner, right, to build some stuff. you're going to create an impact on transportation, so we want you to put a right turn lane in on the road. You're going to be a residential developer, you're bringing in X number of houses, we'd like you to make a contribution to the park authority or to the schools. How's that all work?
Well, first of all, I'll have to make one little thing. We don't exactly ask for proffers. Proffers are voluntary. The developer will ask us for a list of things, and I met with a developer last week with exactly that, saying, well, what sort of thing would you like in this neighborhood?
Because we have a package.
Yes. There is that, and there's a couple of components. There's the component of what would you like, but there's also the component of what do we need to do to make this comply with the comprehensive plan, to be in harmony with the comprehensive plan in the areas that go beyond the zoning ordinance. And it is an interesting process here in Virginia. It's I don't want to say unique, but somewhat unusual compared to some other jurisdictions. Some states have minimum requirements for adequate public facilities. We don't quite do it that way. We do it in a way that is offered or proffered as part of the zoning entitlement package. And that is how we meet our policy goals that are contained in the comprehensive plan and sometimes in other areas as well.
You know, that's an interesting point, because there was a debate in the General Assembly a couple of years ago about, you know, I think a bill was introduced to go to a system where you simply would say, okay, if you want to develop something, you're gonna write a check for X amount to the county, period, and you're not going to have any requirements on you, and the county is going to take the money and and provide those services. But local government really found that the proffer system has worked pretty well for us because we can tailor what's needed to the impact that's being created and the needs in that particular area. And Nell, on the Planning Commission, you guys work with those a lot.
Yes, well, partly because if the contractor is out there anyway digging on building and putting in cement, he can build that left turn lane. He can build that sidewalk more efficiently, cheaper, and faster than we can through the government. And going through VDOT and all of that overhead, the contractor will just say, hey, I'll build this left turn lane. And we'll also see the case, you mentioned proffers, there's also development conditions, which is we are imposing, you have to do this. And the development conditions will be things like the stormwater, handicapped accessibility, that sort of thing. You have to do this or we won't approve it. And we will recommend that you don't approve it. You have the final approval authority. But we have the opposite case also, the recent case that we wanted to block a left turn lane, and the applicant thought, well, we kind of like to have people make a left turn across this very busy road, and the staff said, this is a deniable condition. You know, if you don't block that left turn lane, I would recommend that you don't approve it, and you probably wouldn't approve it for good reason. It's a dangerous intersection.
And when we review these applications, there's a lot of public input, certainly a lot of potential public input, and people should be aware of that and get involved in that. Before the Board of Supervisors ever sees an application to vote on, it's gone through a very thorough staff review.
Yes.
It's gone through, at least in my district, at least one community meeting, if not more.
Yes.
We now have a Citizens Land Use Committee that reviews it. Nell takes it through the Planning Commission, and you've got a lot of people on the Planning Commission with a lot of experience, a lot of years of service, who can add their knowledge to asking the right questions and pointing out things that might need to be fixed or done or otherwise. Often through that process, you find out that it's not a very good idea what this person came up with, and they'll withdraw their application. Many times the application gets better, right? Because a citizen has an idea, or a homeowners association says, hey, here's our experience, and the developer says, okay, we'll try to meet that reality on the ground. Planning Commission adds its experience. Staff will come in and say, we're trying to accomplish something under county policy. And then what we end up getting at the Board of Supervisors is a much better proposal than what started, and that's a good thing.
That is absolutely a good thing. Often a developer, an applicant, will come to staff before they even submit the application, and in fact we encourage that so they don't spend a whole lot of money up front, and will come in with an idea, a sketch, and we can give it a little test actually to see, you know, is this a good idea? Does this further the goals of the comprehensive plan? Is it something that really, is it going to fly? And we try to give them a yes or no, a go or no go warning, let's say. Sometimes they will proceed regardless. Other times they heed our advice. But what's really critical is the input that we get through the citizen participation. When there's things that staff can ask for, recommend, advise, but it really is driven home when the developer hears it from the community, and that is really critical to the whole process.
And it's really all part of the mix. That obviously an owner of property has a right to do things with that property, but it's got to be within the laws that have been passed, and the state has given local government some authority to do certain things. And we have found as a county that when we involve the citizens, when we use the expertise that the Planning Commission has, when staff is implementing our policies, that we can hopefully develop the county in a way that makes sense for future generations. And we could talk a whole lot more about this, but we're out of time. I want to thank Barbara Berlin and Nell Hurley for being on the show today. The planning and development of Fairfax County is in good hands with people like Nell and Barbara and others guiding the way. I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Braddock Neighborhood News. Thank you for watching. Tune in next month for another edition, and please remember to look for ways to volunteer. Your community needs you.